stud receivers went down with injuries on Monday night. 2 rookie running backs came kind of out of nowhere for season high touch counts on Sunday. 1 rookie tight end racked up a receiving line that would make his NFL dad blush. What does all that mean for how you should approach your week 8 waiver runs? That's exactly what we're here to break down in an all new Draft Sharks podcast right now. Matt Schauf and Jared Smola of DraftSharks.com here to help you set your bids and make your Week 8 waiver wire decisions. We're going to talk streamers at quarterback and on defense. We'll touch on some deeper plays at other positions for the 6-team bye-mageddon that we're about to face. But we're going to start with the key wide receiver injuries from Monday night, Jared. Nico Collins in the fourth quarter of that Houston-Seattle game suffered a concussion. Seems like it'll probably cost him at least a game. So what does that mean we should target ahead of a Week 8 home date with San Francisco, if anything, in that Houston offense?
Yeah, unfortunately, I know people aren't going to want to hear this. I don't want to talk about it, but I think Dalton Schultz is the most relevant pickup here, for Week 8 specifically. Even before last night, Schultz had 6 targets and 5 catches in 3 straight games. Then he goes 9 catches, 98 yards, and 10 targets against Seattle. Collins exited pretty late in that game. Seattle had been a good matchup for opposing tight ends, but Schultz now has a 20+% target share in 3 straight games. He's at 18.8% on the season. That's 8th highest among tight ends. And he gets the Niners this week, who are 21st in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends. No Fred Warner, who has been their tight end stopper for so many years. So it's another good spot for Dalton Schultz, and he really just should see nice volume, assuming Nico's out.
I mean, Dalton Schultz is basically Zach Ertz in a garbage offense. So you can't count on receptions every week, but any given week he could catch 5+ passes, obviously could luck into a touchdown at any point. He was only 18% rostered on Sleeper as of Tuesday morning, so plenty available for teams needing a tight end. And I agree, he's easily the best target among Houston options this week. Frankly, I'm not interested in anybody else there. I know Jalen Noel had a good game against Seattle with 4 catches. He had 5 total receptions before that. So I don't want to bet on any other Texans receiver, especially with how poorly CJ Stroud is still playing.
Yeah, that's the big thing, is I just don't want to buy too much into this offense. So Nico's probably going to miss Week 8. Christian Kirk seemingly re-injured his hamstring in practice last week, so he could miss additional time. So there is opportunity here for Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel, the Texans' 2 rookies. Now, before the Nico injury last night, they were using a 4-man rotation behind Nico with Xavier Hutchinson still involved. Braxton Berrios was playing way too many snaps in that game. So you can't trust Higgins or Noel in Week 8 fantasy lineups. I think they're both fine stashes in deeper leagues if you have bench space just to kind of see what happens. The Texans, to me, need to get those guys going. They need something to spark this offense. I think those 2 rookies are the best chance they have, beyond Nico Collins. So I hope they get more playing time going forward. Stash them if you have room, but I wouldn't try to use them in lineups in Week 8.
Yeah, totally fine with stashing either of those guys. Would not go out of my way to do so because Houston has an offensive coordinator that seems like he's auditioning for a job outside of football. CJ Stroud looks bad. I mean, we were hoping that heading into the bye, his 2 better games were good signs, but it looks like they were just kind of blips against bad defenses. He's not playing well, so just not an offense to bet on. So we'll see what can happen with Jaden Higgins, Jalen Noel going forward, but don't get too excited about anybody. On the other side, no, not on the other side, in the other game on Monday night, Mike Evans, just back from a hamstring injury, suffered a broken collarbone against the Lions and a concussion on the same play. I mean, he'll have plenty of time, unfortunately, to recover from that concussion because the collarbone's probably going to end his season. Now, we've had injury issues at wide receiver for the Bucs all year. I mean, Chris Godwin started the year not playing. Mike Evans was then out for a while. Chris Godwin has been back out for a while. We don't know exactly when he'll be good to go or if he'll get back close to full Chris Godwin. So we did get Emeka Egbuka, did not miss any games with his hamstring injury, surprisingly. Led the team in targets, was probably not near himself last night, but is going to be involved. What about beyond that, though? What do we do for this week at wide receiver among the Bucs?
Yeah, Tez Johnson is a lot more interesting now than he was this time last week to me. Like you said, Matt Evans, it sounds like he could be back like week 14, 15, 16, but for all intents and purposes, he's pretty much done for the fantasy season. Chris Godwin, I mean, just we'll see. He didn't look great the first time coming back, and now he's going to be have coming back from whatever this fibula injury is. That's probably related to last year's injury. So I just don't know what he's going to offer them. So Tez Johnson, who clearly ran ahead of Cameron Johnson last night. That was a question I had. I wasn't sure, we get this type of split, but 74% of the pass routes for Tez Johnson last night, catches four of 9 targets for 58 yards and a touchdown. That was an 18% target share. That's a number he might be able to hover around, at least until Mike Evans gets back now in what prior to last night had been a really good Bucs passing game. That was just a dud from Baker Mayfield and the offense. But I still believe in the passing game. Tez Johnson, I think he's going to have a significant role, at least until Godwin comes back. Even after Godwin comes back, like if Tez Johnson is in 3 wide receiver sets, like he's going to be on the field in this passing game. He obviously has the big playability we've seen a couple times over the last couple weeks now. So I think assuming Chris Godwin is out in week 8, which I am assuming, Tez Johnson is startable, a low-level starter. And I think it's worth stashing for, beyond that as a potential asset even after their week 9 bye.
I think Sterling Shepard is also still interesting here. Sterling Shepard and Tez Johnson each ran a route on 74% of dropbacks for the Bucs in that game against Detroit, both trailing only Emeka Egbuka. Shepard caught all 7 of his targets, just 25 yards. So reminded you of his limitations there, and lost a fumble, which is obviously not going to help. But they're probably going to have plenty of 3 wide receiver sets going forward. And again, like you said, we'll see about Chris Godwin. It's certainly worth remembering and like realizing, if you didn't know it in the first place, that the Bucs attempted 50 passes in that game against Detroit. So that's got to be taken into account when you're looking at everybody's target counts in that game. That's 10 more pass attempts than any other Bucs game this season. Before Monday night, the Bucs are averaging 32.5 pass attempts across the first 6 games. So that's a more realistic number to expect going forward. But we also have a favorable matchup against the Saints in week 8 for whatever the Bucs choose to do on offense. So I think both receivers are interesting. I agree that Tez Johnson is more interesting than I thought he was going to be a couple weeks back. And he's a good combo with Baker Mayfield, who we know loves to take shots downfield. I have to assume that Baker Mayfield is in love with Tez Johnson as a player, just the styles of the two players. And on a larger note with Tez Johnson, I think he's kind of like wide receiver Kyron Williams right now, in that a prospect in college who produced for a while at a high level program and then gives you something to be scared of in pre-draft testing, gets knocked down the board because of it, and thus becomes an even easier guy to invest in because of now the lowered price with still the potential physical upside. Now, we'll see what Tez Johnson becomes in the pros, and he might ultimately not be a fantasy difference maker, but you didn't have to put much into stashing him. And already less than halfway through his rookie season, he is making an impact, which says something about his long-term outlook.
Yeah, I'd be taking this opportunity in Dynasty to try to sell Tez Johnson. A wide receiver under 160 is, I don't know, is he under 150 pounds? I don't know what he's actually at right now, but like I don't see that long term being something that is sustainable. But I think in the short term, even for the rest of the season, again, Johnson could be helpful. With Sterling Shepard, 7 targets on a 14% target share last night. It's funny, he's been like right around 14 or 15% of the targets in like almost every Bucs game this season. That's just kind of what he is, right? Like, we know what Sterling Shepard is. The interesting thing is going to be when Godwin does come back, how it works with Shepard and Tez Johnson. To me, you put Chris Godwin in the slot where he's been better throughout his career. You keep Tez Johnson on the outside, and that's your primary 3 wide receiver set. But it's possible that, Godwin plays more on the outside. That keeps Shepard involved. So we're going to have to see what the wide receiver core looks like once Godwin is back.
You know who else is not a sustainable size at wide receiver is Devontae Smith.
Yeah, but he's like 175 or 180, isn't he? Like, that's a big difference, like 25 extra pounds.
I mean, I don't have the number in front of me, but I thought he was in the 160s, or maybe I thought he was in the 160s at the combine.
Could be. The last Buck to talk about here, though, is Cade Otton, who, we saw him do this last year in games without Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Now, Buka's there now, so it's not the same setup, but Otton over the last 2 games, 15 targets on a 20.5% target share. Again, I think at least for week 8, assuming Godwin remains out, I think Otton, you were going to have him projected for about 20% of the Bucs targets, and that's going to make him probably a top 12 tight end in our week 8 rankings. He will be a top 12 tight end because there's 6 teams on bye this week.
Yeah, so all those teams are like, who should I start between Theo Johnson and Mason Taylor? The answer is probably really more like Dalton Schultz or Cade Otton for
Yeah,
at least the next couple weeks.
yeah, I agree.
Speaking of tight ends, though, Oronde Gadsden has demanded that we start putting him in the conversation. Followed last week's 7 catches with a 7-catch, 164-yard touchdown performance in the loss to the Colts. It certainly helped that the Chargers threw 55 passes in this game, but even within that, this is the 4th largest single game receiving total ever for a rookie tight end. It's the largest since 1985. And that number was put up by Mark Bavaro, who was pretty good, by the way, in the NFL. 16.7% target share for Oronde Gadsden in this game. So, again, a big role, but it was helped by the team volume. But that said, he had deep balls go for 24, for 30, for 53 yards in this game. He ranked 3rd on the team in pass routes, edging Keenan Allen by 1, so was heavily involved in this game plan. It was the 5th straight increase in snap share this season for Gadsden, and the 2nd straight game in which he played 75% of the snaps and had 7 catches. So we can't expect 7 catches per week going forward. And he was aided 2 weeks ago by Quentin Johnston being out of the lineup, but Johnston was back for week 7. We still saw plenty of Gadsden. We saw him well ahead of the other Chargers tight ends, and we saw what he can do when he gets the ball. So, Jared, it seems like Oronde Gadsden is suddenly at least in the discussion at the bottom of tight end 1 territory on a weekly basis.
Yeah, I'm definitely buying into this. I think if you're looking for a tight end just for week 8, Schultz and Otton are still probably a bit safer, but I don't think Gadsden's that far behind them for week 8, and I think he crushes them in upside the rest of the way. So Gadsden would be my top waiver target at the position this week. He's emerged as the Chargers' clear top tight end, 77% route rate in 2 straight games. Even before the huge game last week, he had 7 catches for 68 yards the week prior. Just looking for the entire season now, he is 3rd among all tight ends in yards per route run, and he's also 3rd in PFF receiving grade. So like he'd been good even before this role expansion. Now he has the role here. The target competition obviously remains tough with those 3 Chargers wide receivers, but I'd say, first of all, Gadsden is a problem for those wide receivers as well. Like, he looks that good to me. Like, he was their best pass catcher in that game last week, as the numbers would suggest. But even just watching the game, like, he was awesome. So I think he can continue to get 15 to 20% of the targets on a weekly basis. And then the Chargers, they're 3rd in pass rate, 3rd in neutral pass rate, 2nd in pass rate over expected. They lead the NFL in pass attempts per game. They're 3rd in passing yards per game. So there's enough to go around here where even if Gadsden does settle in as the 4th target in the passing game, which he probably will, there's still enough where if he's getting 15, 16% of the targets for him to be a fantasy factor.
Right. It's a lot easier at tight end to take a week here and there where you only get 4 targets than it is with the wide receivers. So there's room for Gadsden. He has emerged lately. There's nobody at the position that should keep him down. So we had one customer email in and say, who should I drop to pick up Gadsden this week? He had Mason Taylor. He had Theo Johnson on his roster. I said, go ahead and drop Mason Taylor for him. Sure. Between Theo Johnson and Mason Taylor, I'll take the guy in an offense that can actually score touchdowns. But I have no problem dumping Mason Taylor to pick up Gadsden because I think the upside smashes on the Gadsden side versus Mason Taylor.
Yep. Yeah. Not really close for me between those 3 guys. And I would drop Mason Taylor. I think, especially once Garrett Wilson comes back, that even the second option in the Jets passing game is not really something you want to be messing with.
That's for sure. You might want to start messing with the second option in the Bears run game, though, because Kyle Monangai, another rookie, had a breakthrough game against the Saints, 81 yards and a touchdown on 13 carries, plus 2 catches for 13 yards, actually edged DeAndre Swift in receptions in that game, still trailed him in routes, but played only 5 fewer total snaps than DeAndre Swift in that game. That is the 2nd straight game of a snap share increase coming out of the week 5 bye for Kyle Monangai. It's also the 2nd straight game of the Bears run game overall, just looking better. So, Jared, is it time to make sure that Kyle Monangai is on somebody's roster in your league?
Yeah, Monangai would be my top waiver target of the week at any position. And the more I dug into him and prep for this show, the more stuff I found to like about Monangai and his fantasy outlook going forward. So for starters, the Bears run game has just been awesome in 2 games off of their bye week. 145 yards and a score on 5.4 yards per carry against Washington in week 6, and then 222 yards and 2 touchdowns on 5.6 yards per carry versus the Saints last week. And those were 2 defenses that were like pretty good against the run heading into those games. Not dominant, but in the top half of the league in run defense. Now, it's largely been the scheme propelling this rushing production. If you look at the Bears in terms of yards before contact per attempt, in their first 4 games before the bye week, 1.28 yards before contact per attempt as a team. That was 26th in the NFL. In their 2 games since the bye, 3.48 yards before contact per attempt. That is second best in the NFL. So that's working in Monangai's favor. The Bears have also shifted toward the run in their 2 games since the bye. They were 56.6% pass in their 4 games prior to the bye, 46.8% pass in the 2 games post bye. Some of that's obviously game script, but even neutral pass rate over expected, that stuff is shifting pretty significantly towards the run since the bye week. And again, that goes hand in hand with the run game just being better. Caleb Williams still has his, shortcomings. So I think Ben Johnson and this offense will continue to lean on the run game going forward. As you said, Matt, Monangai's role is on the rise. It was very close to a 50-50 split in terms of playing time last week, in terms of snaps, even in terms of third downs. Monangai actually played one more third down snap than DeAndre Swift last week. So it wasn't even like Swift's dominating the passing game stuff. The last thing to note here is the schedule. In the short term, the Bears' schedule looks awesome. Their next 3 games are against the Ravens, Bengals, and Giants. Those are all bottom 7 running back defenses. So I think Monangai, especially this week with the 6 teams on bye, like you can use him as an RB3 flex play this week. Now, after those next 3 games, from week 11 on, the Bears have the second toughest running back schedule according to our adjusted fantasy points allowed to the position. 4 of their last 7 games are against top 11 running back defenses. So maybe there's an opportunity. I think this goes with DeAndre Swift as well to, use these guys for the next 3 weeks and then maybe consider selling them before that schedule gets really tough.
Yeah, and more specifically on that schedule front, you mentioned the next 3 matchups. There is no defense on the Bears' schedule that ranks higher than 16th in rush DVOA right now until Green Bay in week 14. So there is certainly a chance that Bears running backs could help you all the way up until that either beginning or verge of fantasy playoff time. But then week 14, we've got Green Bay, then Cleveland, then Green Bay in consecutive weeks, week 14 through week 16. So make sure that you're aware of that stretch if you are relying on a Bears running back ahead of that point. Certainly, I'm cool with going ahead and trying to make trades. We mentioned previously how we don't trust DeAndre Swift to stay up where he was in that first game back from the bye. I still think that he looks sellable, and DeAndre Swift being the lead back is another mark in Monangai's favor. His chances of maintaining a solid role as opposed to just settling in as a clear number 2 here and not getting as much work as he did in this game.
Yeah, with Swift, like I'm buying the efficiency more this week than last just because we saw it again. But the issue with him is, again, like this was close to a 50-50 split last week. So like if that continues, Swift's not going to be producing like he did these last 2 games. For me, I would hold these guys for at least another couple games. I do think the running game is going to be productive again in these next 2-3 games. But definitely would be looking to sell Swift for sure, probably just because he has the name value. He's the lead back. I think he could be a good sell in 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, what I would say on Swift is sell if you're selling high. If you get somebody who's like, Swift is dominating right now, I need him, then go for it. I don't think that Monangai is going to keep progressing to the point where he overtakes DeAndre Swift. I think he'll stay involved to the point that limits DeAndre Swift's opportunities a bit versus what you might think just from looking at Swift's numbers.
Yep, I agree.
Another backfield to watch because of a late round rookie is Kansas City's, because Brashard Smith might have just broken out. And let's get a little further into that. Through the first 6 games, this rookie had 8 total carries, 9 total catches. Then in the win over the Raiders, Smith had 14 carries, 5 receptions. Jared, were they trending toward this usage or did it just come out of nowhere?
So, I mean, the usage last week is quite a bit misleading, I think. 10 of Smith's 14 carries came in the fourth quarter after Patrick Mahomes had been pulled. Now, he had 4 carries and 5 targets in the first 3 quarters, so that's definitely not nothing. And the passing game usage has been there for a while now. His last 4 games for Brashard Smith, 4, 3, 4, and 5 targets. He's still not playing a lot, but like when he's on the field, there's scheming touches to Brashard Smith. I expect that to continue. I wonder if the rushing role is going to grow. I don't know if they see Smith ready to, take that over. They definitely like him in the passing game. It's possible. Kareem Hunt is not good. Pacheco's looking better lately, but he's still not like, it's not like impossible that Smith takes some carries from him. But to me, Smith is still worth stashing as we kind of see how this plays out. But again, I just wonder if he's going to kind of stay in this role where it's kind of like the Jerick McKinnon role we saw for the Chiefs a few years ago, where he's doing it in the passing game. He gets a few carries here and there, but it's kind of tough to rely on week to week.
That's what I was going to say is I shouldn't say we've seen this because this is still developing. We're still figuring out what this is, but we've seen what this might be. And if Brashard Smith is just young Jerick McKinnon, then that's a good role for him. It's a helpful spot for the offense, but it's also a limited touch role that was receiving heavy with minor rushing work. I certainly think that it's quite notable that most of the carries came in the fourth quarter with that game decided, with starters resting. It's a good time to give the rookie some work, just to get him going. He did average just 2.8 yards per carry in that game, averaging 3.0 per carry for the season. So I don't think anything about Brashard Smith's rushing so far says you got to hand me the ball more. He certainly looks like a piece that they believe is going to be helpful on the receiving front and probably a good complement to Isaiah Pacheco. So maybe Kareem Hunt is in trouble. We've been talking about how coaches have been talking about wanting to get Isaiah Pacheco going a bit more, giving him the ball more lately. He has looked better lately. So maybe we see a bit more of like Pacheco, Brashard Smith being the combo that leads this backfield. I don't think that we're going to see Brashard Smith take over the carry lead or even take on too much of the rushing work and shove the veterans aside.
I agree. Now, an injury to either of those veterans, I don't think the other one would dominate carries. I think in that case, you'd see Brashard Smith maybe mix in for, 5, 6, 7 carries in game. So again, he's worth stashing in a lot of leagues. I just don't think he's definitely not a fantasy starter yet. Again, the 14 carries last week, very misleading.
Jared, where the hell did 9 catches for 92 yards and a touchdown from Xavier Legette come from? I mean, I would have bet that would be closer to his season totals than a single game for him this season.
Yeah, this is a reminder to consider starting number 2 and number 3 wide receivers against the Jets, because you have Sauce Gardner, locking down the number 1 receiver in a lot of cases, which was the case for at least most of that game. Gardner left that game with a concussion, which is a big loss for the Jets potentially against the Bengals this week, who we'll talk about next year, I think. But that's it for me. It's Legette feasted on these, other Jets corners that have not been good this year. The Jets have given up, they gave up 70 yards and a touchdown to Calvin Austin earlier this season. They gave up the 114-yard game to Ryan Flournoy. Like, we've seen this. I am not buying Xavier Legette. I will not be adding him to any of my redraft rosters.
Xavier Legette's previous 2 games included 2 and 3 targets. Earlier this season, he got 8 targets in week 2. He caught 1 of those for a loss of 2 yards. He got 7 targets in the opener this season. He caught 3 of those for 10 yards. I think that those are a lot closer to the real Xavier Legette. I agree. Going forward, consider that number 2 wide receiver against the Jets that you might not have be paying a whole lot of attention to otherwise anyway. I'm not going to go buy Xavier Legette off of waivers this week.
And remember, they just got Jalen Coker back too, and he was limited in his first game back. He did not play a full slate of snaps. I think his role is going to grow going forward. I would still bet on Coker outproducing Legette going forward. I'm not super interested in either guy just because it's, this Panthers passing game.
Yeah, for sure, which is going to be missing its quarterback this week, by the way, but we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. On to quarterbacks. As I mentioned earlier, by Mageddon, we've got 6 teams on bye this week, so that means lots of teams are going to need replacements at lots of positions, and quarterback, obviously a position that lots of people like to stream anyway. So if you are looking for a streamer at this position, I want to start by saying Bo Nix and Jordan Love get the top 2 scoring matchups by our adjusted fantasy points allowed this week. And before you're like, hey, idiot, those guys aren't streamers and not available in my league, I know. I'm just trying to set up what we're talking about when we say QB streamers. I'm not talking about going to get a quarterback to start over your guy that has a good matchup. Jordan Love, Bo Nix are 2 guys whose fantasy production so far has been inconsistent to the point where you might feel like you should try to get a replacement. So I want to point out that those 2 guys are in great spots this week. I would start them over the other players that we're about to discuss. With that in mind, Jared, who do you like as a week 8 quarterback streamer?
Yeah, two guys stand out to me. The first is Joe Flacco. I am at least buying this for week 8 because the Bengals are at home for the Jets this week. The Bengals have a 25.5 point implied total. That's a top 8 mark on the week. The Jets on the season, they're 16th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. But again, there's a pretty good chance they're going to be without Sauce Gardner for this game, who suffered a concussion last week. That would just make this matchup even better. They would have no one to stop Jamar Chase, T. Higgins either. So I think Flacco can definitely do it again, at least one more week. Probably not as big of a game as he had last week, but definitely usable for fantasy. The other option here, I think, is Marcus Mariota, who I'm expecting to start on Monday night against the Chiefs. We'll see about Jaden Daniels. His hamstring injury supposedly isn't serious, but to me, like hamstring injuries, unless you're Emeka Egbuka, they usually cost players a game, especially a quarterback like Jaden, who relies on the rushing ability. So it's a tough spot for Mariota. In Kansas City, the Commanders are only implied for 19 points, but it's just the rushing that I think makes Mariota a decent spot starter this week. He ran for 40 yards and a touchdown in his first start earlier this season, just 2 carries for 20 yards in the other start. That second start came against Atlanta, by the way, who has emerged as a really strong defense. They're second in adjusted points allowed to quarterbacks on the season. So, the fact that Mariota kind of underwhelmed in that one, I think, is less concerning now. And of course, he also had the big, he's been a runner throughout his career, including in his 2 appearances for Washington last year. He had nice rushing lines in both of those games. So, I think the passing is going to be tough for Mariota on Monday night, but I do think he'll give you enough rushing to, be a decent fantasy play.
I would feel better about him if he were playing somebody other than Kansas City. I think Steve Spagnuolo is one of the better defensive schemers in the entire league and, has a long record behind him on that front. I think especially when you look at how injured that Washington offense is, I wouldn't be surprised if he comes up with a plan to limit the rushing for Mariota and forces that passing a little bit more. I certainly like Joe Flacco to lead the QB streamers here. I think I would probably rather play a Falcons quarterback, whether that's Michael Penix Jr. or Kirk Cousins this week against the Dolphins, then go to Mariota against Kansas City. We're going to have to see. That's the hard part about it now. If it is Michael Penix that's on waivers in your league, then we'll see about the bone bruise. He has a bone bruise in his foot and his ankle. I don't know if that's 2 bone bruises near each other, if that's one bone bruise that spreads across, whatever. He's got some foot issues that he's dealing with. So we don't know yet exactly who the quarterback's going to be for Atlanta. Sounds like they're expecting it to be Penix, calling him day to day, but it could be Kirk Cousins. So that could be problematic for, just making the waiver pickup this week. But I would play either of those guys, I think, over Marcus Mariota this week against the Dolphins defense that's not doing anything so far. One other guy to throw in there, though, is Andy Dalton against the Bills. Obviously, playing Andy Dalton's not going to make anybody comfortable, but this Bills defense has not looked scary in any aspect. Andy Dalton's been around enough, and I think that there's enough going at Carolina at wide receiver right now to make him okay. If you're so hard up that you're like, oh man, do I start Marcus Mariota or Kirk Cousins or Andy Dalton this week? Andy Dalton's at least in that mix with those other guys.
Yeah, I think you're kind of effed if you're starting Andy Dalton this week. He would not be in the mix for me for any one quarterback, because I think the Falcons quarterback call makes sense. That the tricky thing with Miami, they're like per pass attempt numbers on defense are god awful. They just don't face many pass attempts because their run defense is so bad. The offense isn't really keeping pace in a lot of these games, and it really should be a big Bijan Robinson game. But the Falcons do have a high implied total this week, so there is a decent chance that some of the touchdowns come via the pass.
It is going to be harder this week to fight for those streaming options, whether it's quarterback or defense, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I mean, that's why we like to look ahead when we're talking about this stuff as well, and not just talking about highlighting a week ahead defense on this show or a week ahead defense in our streaming defense article. We're also talking about the free agent finder, which you can get 2-week out matchups and projections across any position. So whatever you're planning ahead for, like say last week you said, nah, I've got 3 wide receivers on bye in that bye-mageddon week. I better go ahead and lock down my guy so I'm not fighting the rest of my league for options. That's why we've got it there. That's why we do those projections ahead of just the current week, why we list all the matchups, why we have our strength of schedule pages that you can check for any week going forward. It's so you can get ahead of your league mates, so you don't have to battle somebody in week to win that waiver play that you're both now going for. Of course, if that's your situation where you are fighting for those players this week, Free Agent Finder's ready to help you on that front as well. So check that out. Check out our articles with those waiver targets, and check out the strength of schedule pages that we've talked about on our past few episodes of this show. You can find links to all that, of course, in the show notes below, regardless of where you're watching or listening to this show. Jared, as we always do, let's close out with the streaming defenses here, starting with week 8. Who do you like?
Yeah, I'll mention the Colts, who are available in 50% of Yahoo leagues. I think they're the best defense play this week against Tennessee. It's been the matchup to attack all year. The Titans looked better to start last week's game for like a quarter, and then it all kind of fell apart. Cam Ward still ended up turning it over twice, taking another 5 sacks. So the Colts, I think, are the clear top play if they're available. If not, I would go to that Falcons defense, who it's available in 90% of Yahoo leagues right now. Again, I think it's a legit good defense. They have really limited both the Bills and 49ers offenses the last 2 weeks. From a fantasy perspective, they're kind of flirting with top 12 production so far, depending on your scoring system. And they are 7.5-point home favorites against Miami. Dolphins offense just totally falling apart. Tua can't stop throwing picks. The offensive line is still bad. So it really should be a chance for this Falcons defense to feast.
Yeah, Falcons allowed 324 yards to the Niners on Sunday night, which doesn't look like a good number, but it's actually the smallest yardage total for San Francisco in any game so far this season. As you mentioned, Tua's tossed 3 INTs in 2 straight games. The Dolphins also have not gotten more than 276 total yards in any of their 4 road games so far this year. They're at Atlanta this week, where, as you mentioned, the Bills struggled to get yards and score points just a couple weeks ago on Monday night. So I like the Falcons as well. And then looking ahead to week 9, the Jaguars are a sneakier pickup even than the Falcons, I would say, because they don't do anything especially well on defense. Well, that's probably not fair. So they're at the Raiders. Geno Smith has the same issue as Tua, leading the league in interceptions, tied with Tua at 10 picks. The Raiders are also tied for the league lead with 12 total turnovers. And that just happens to align with the one thing that the Jaguars have done well on defense so far, which is pickoff passes. They're second in the league with 10 INTs. They're second in the league with 14 total takeaways. So they take the ball away. The Raiders give the ball away. And the last time we saw the Raiders on the field was their worst offensive performance in an ugly overall season.
Yep, I think Jacksonville will be a nice week 9 play. I'd consider the Ravens in week 9. I know they've been horrible lately, but they're going to be getting some dudes back coming off the bye week. They get Miami in week 9. Assuming Lamar Jackson plays, they're going to be playing with a lead. You're going to get a lot of Tua dropbacks. So I think you can consider Baltimore. And then last defense for week 9. See if the Lions get dropped this week on their bye week, because they get Minnesota in week 9. And the Vikings have actually been the best matchup for opposing defenses this season based on our adjusted points allowed.
Yeah, and it does not matter if it's Carson Wentz or JJ McCarthy starting for that offense. It's a positive one. Whether you need a streaming defense, a replacement starter at quarterback, or a stash for late season upside, we have got you covered at draftsharks.com. Check out our weekly waiver wire targets for offense, for defense, and even for IDP. You can check out our weekly streaming defense article. You can check out our Shark Bites section to get more info on why a lot of these players either matter or don't, based on what we saw this past week, what lies ahead of them. You can also check our free agent finder to get waiver recommendations that are catered to any specific league that you have synced at draftsharks.com. All of that is working together to make Draft Sharks your unfair advantage.